It's the mid-90s and fully rendered 3D games are quickly becoming a new trend. Developers are figuring out how to use the power of the soon-to-be-released PlayStation to push boundaries and make their characters leap off the screen. Enter Naughty Dog, a relatively unknown studio at the time, interested in making a game in their favorite genre, the character-based action platform game, inspired by classics such as Donkey Kong Country. What they came up with was a game about a scrappy bandicoot with a big attitude and an even bigger mission to save his world from a mad scientist. Today, we're diving into this world of the Crash Bandicoot series, exploring its history, development, and its success. So grab your crates, spin around, and let's crash through another exciting trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello, and welcome to the 211th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people that have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we're looking back at Crash Bandicoot, originally released for the Sony PlayStation on September 9th, 1996. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who breaks more boxes than Crash himself. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, what is the last thing you smashed by accident?
Would probably have to be my toe on the bed frame, Dave.
Your toe on the bed frame.
Yep.
Well, that's not terribly exciting, is it? Is your toe
It's not.
okay?
It's. I mean, it is at this point. It's been a while, but sure as shit hurt. So, I mean, the yelling was probably exciting for someone.
Was there anyone around to see it?
I mean, as loud as I yelled, the whole neighborhood probably heard it. So,
I was just
no one
wondering if it
saw it,
was.
but definitely heard.
So I was wondering if it was comical for someone.
You know, it was like those old cartoons. I just grabbed my foot and yahoo!
Okay,
So,
sounds like a
you know,
plan. All right. Well,
I don't think it was a plan, but you know.
today we are looking at the origins of the Crash Bandicoot series. But before we get to that, why don't you take some time and tell our listeners what else has happened during this week in gaming history?
Alrighty, kicking it off on September 13th, 1985, Nintendo released Super Mario Bros. For the Famicom, or the NES, here in America, but the Famicom was in Japan, and that game would go on to become one of the most influential and iconic titles in video game history. Created by Shigeru Miyamoto, Super Mario Bros. Introduced players to Mario, a player on a quest to rescue Princess Toadstool from the evil Bowser. The game's innovative side-scrolling platform gameplay, memorable music, and vibrant world of the Mushroom Kingdom captivated players and set new standards for the gaming industry. Super Mario Bros. Not only popularized the platformer genre, but also played a crucial role in reviving the video game industry after the crash of 1983, solidifying Mario as one of the most recognizable characters in gaming. We covered its incredible history back in episode 159, so dive into our archives and give it a listen if you'd like to learn more.
Yeah, it's a good story.
Indeed. It's a fantastic one. On September 9th, 1998, Insomniac Games and Sony Computer Entertainment released Spyro the Dragon for the PlayStation. This vibrant platformer introduced players to Spyro, a spirited purple dragon on a quest to rescue his fellow dragons from captivity. Spyro the Dragon was celebrated for its colorful, expansive worlds, inventive level design, and charming protagonist. The game offered engaging exploration, a variety of abilities, and delightful character interactions that set it apart from other platformers of the time. Its success helped establish Spyro the Dragon as a beloved franchise and solidified Spyro as an iconic character in the gaming world, cherished by players for an adventurous spirit and the game's whimsical charm.
Whimsical charm. Were you a Spyro or a Crash person?
Uh, that's not a fair question.
Both?
Abso-fucking-lutely.
Yeah.
They were both fantastic games. They had their own thing,
Yeah, for
Spyro's
sure.
they had their own unique characteristics, I mean, both had fantastic characters in them, and they had different play styles. One you get to put on an Ooga Booga mask, and the other one you got to sail across these as a dragon.
True, it's true. They definitely both have unique qualities that made them both great games.
Absolutely. On September 12th, 1998, Nintendo released Pokemon Yellow Special Pikachu Edition for the Game Boy in Japan. This enhanced version of Pokemon Red and Blue closely followed the storyline of the popular Pokemon anime, with players starting their journey with Pikachu as their companion. Pokemon Yellow featured several unique elements, such as Pikachu following the player on screen and interactions with characters from the anime, like Team Rocket's Jesse and James. The game was praised for its charm and became a beloved entry in the series, helping to solidify Pokemon's status as a global cultural phenomenon. And that's where I got my start in the Pokemon series, if I
That's
remember
us.
correctly.
You were a yellow person?
I mean, I definitely liked Red and Blue, but I got Yellow Edition first, and then later got Red and Blue. Um, because
Got it.
I mean, you grow up watching the anime, and you're like, I want to be like Ash, and then you get Yellow, and you're like, I'm Ash. So
You know, true statement.
yeah. On September 10th, 2002, EA Dice released Battlefield 1942 for PC, a groundbreaking first person shooter that introduced large scale multiplayer warfare to the gaming world. Set during World War II, the game allowed players to engage in epic battles across land, sea, and air, with the ability to choose from various classes and operate a wide range of vehicles, including tanks, planes, and ships. Battlefield 1942 was praised for its innovative gameplay, dynamic maps, and emphasis on team based tactics, which set it apart from other shooters of the time. The game laid the foundation for the successful Battlefield series, which would go on to become one of the most popular and influential franchises in the genre. Man, the LAN parties Dave used to have with that game.
I
At least
they
one.
we did
You
at least
did. I
have one.
remember.
Yeah, we did at
Because
least have
that
one.
y'all were down up in the basement, and I was up on the computer in the family room playing with y'all.
I was trying to rack my head. We did at least have one, but Battlefield 1942 came out while I was in college, and our dorm was wired. So initially, most of my playing was of it over the network, the college network. We used to play with one another across the college. So
Nice. Well, you did bring it home once because I got to experience it firsthand. I remember trying to land the bomber on the bridge with you and your friends.
and we would do loops over the bridge, like loop de loops. So we would go under the bridge and loop over it and come back around.
Such
I
good
think that was
times.
Operation Market Garden is what we used to do that on.
Yes, that is absolutely right. Good memory, Dave, for a
Yeah,
change.
I know. I try.
On September 12th, 2003, Valve officially launched Steam, a digital distribution platform that would revolutionize the gaming industry. Initially created to simplify updates for Valve's own games, Steam quickly expanded to offer a wide range of titles from various developers and publishers. The platform introduced features like automatic game updates, digital rights management, and social networking for gamers. Steam's success paved the way for the digital distribution of games, becoming the dominant platform for PC gaming and significantly influencing how games are bought, played, and updated. Over the years, Steam has grown into a vast ecosystem, offering a massive library of games, community features, and sales events that have made it a cornerstone of modern gaming. Now, if you don't know what Steam is, you're obviously not on PC
I remember. I
as a
remember
gamer.
Half-Life 2 and the introduction of Steam so vividly because there was like there was nothing like it at the time, and we were like, "What? We have to download this program to play this game?" And yeah, it's funny to think of where it came from. Which the perception at the time was it was just a mechanism through which Valve could offer their games. Like it wasn't on the disc, it was online, or update their games to what it is now. Like it blows my mind how far we've come in 20 years with that. So
Yeah, I mean, obviously by the time that I got around to Steam, it was already being used for other games. But I did at least know that its roots came from Half Life and all that fun stuff. And you know, there are definitely games that I still am like, why do I have to download this thing to play this game? But hey, that's the way some publishers are. You know. Last up for this week in gaming history, on September 9th, 2014, Bungie and Activision released Destiny for PlayStation 4, PlayStation 3, Xbox One, and Xbox 360. This ambitious online only first person shooter combined elements of traditional shooters with MMORPG style mechanics, allowing players to explore a vast, shared world as guardians defending humanity's last safe city. Destiny introduced a blend of cooperative and competitive multiplayer modes, along with a rich, evolving universe. Despite a mixed initial reception due to its story, the game quickly garnered a large and dedicated player base, thanks to its polished gameplay, stunning visuals, and the allure of continual updates and expansions. Destiny set the stage for the live service model in gaming and laid the groundwork for its even more successful sequel, Destiny 2.
that it did. All right. So Crash Bandicoot, Rob, you a fan of the series?
I have played at least one of the three games. Well, more
Uh
than three, but the
yeah,
three original.
way more than 3. And you've never played any of the modern ones?
I again, no PlayStation, and they don't really, to my knowledge, make it available on non PlayStation.
Mhm.
So I only got to experience the PlayStation and the PS2 versions, but those ones I played the shit out of.
So our topic today, Crash Bandicoot, was developed by Naughty Dog. Now, if you'd like to learn about Naughty Dog, we covered their founding and early history in our episode on The Last of Us, which was recently. It was actually episode 198, just back in June. Of course, you can go back to our website, www.memocardlane.com, to check out old episodes or anywhere you get your podcasts. So if you're interested in finding out about it, go give that a listen. It was started basically by a few friends who met in Hebrew school. And, as a team, Naughty Dog started off writing software for Apple II computers. They were titles that included Math Jam, Ski Craze, Dream Zone, Keef the Thief, and The Rings of Power. So, The Rings of Power, they had created, it was a 1992 title that they had worked with EA on, Electronic Arts, and it was published by EA. And the process of making The Rings of Power really turned the team at Naughty Dog off to video game development. They did not like how the relationship with EA developed. They lost creative control of the project during the process. They didn't like the support that they got from EA's marketing division in the end. So by the time they were finished, they had a really sour taste in their mouth, and therefore they made the decision to step away from the gaming industry. One of the founders went to go pursue his PhD, and the other left video games to go into movie development. His specialist was the 3D graphics, so he went and started a special effects company where he was kind of hoping to take his skills as a 3D graphic artist and use them for something completely different, which makes sense, right?
I'd say so.
So they went on this hiatus and they started doing other things. And about 8 months into this break, they got a call from the founder of EA, Trip Hawkins. Now, Hawkins had recently left EA and he was working on, he had started another company called 3DO, and they were creating something called the 3DO console. And Trip Hawkins was making a new console, wanted it to be the most powerful console out there. And basically, he reached out to the team at Naughty Dog, who he had obviously worked with on the Rings of Power, and basically pitched the 3DO to them. He laid out his plans for the console. He offered to give the team at Naughty Dog free development kits, which they liked the idea, right? They liked the idea. They liked what the 3DO was. They liked Tripp's proposal. And so they also, as part of that agreement, they also were going to give Naughty Dog all creative control, and that's what they wanted the most, right? That's the words I was looking for. They wanted creative control, so they agreed to create this game for Tripp's new console, and that's the whole agreement, right? So the team at Naughty Dog begins development on their new game. They don't have a publisher. There's no publishing contract, and so they have to fund this process from the money they earn making the Rings of Power. According to one of the founders, Jason Rubin and Andy Gavin, they largely consider this moment the moment that Naughty Dog stopped being a hobby game company and started being a company that actually did game development as an actual profession. So they're creating a game for the 3DO, and they got to decide basically like what kind of game are they looking to create. Now, the popular games in the arcades at the time were fighting games. The in games at the time were Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter and Samurai Showdown. Those were the in things. And so as they looked closer and closer and closer at that, they felt that fighting games were really an ideal genre for them to go into here, because fighting games were very focused. They're very small in nature, right? You make a background and a single character, and you've got half of what you're working on, right? And then you just make more backgrounds and more characters. Like, it's not, it's very focused, and that was great for a small company like theirs. And also, like, it was the trend, right? So they were going to work on capitalizing on the fighting game trend. So they decided a fighting game is the way to go. Their idea was to make an over the top and slightly more comedic version of Mortal Kombat. It was going to be inspired by all of the Hong Kong kung fu films that they had watched together over the years. So, Mortal Kombat was their primary inspiration. They had really wanted to recreate the look, of Mortal Kombat with the digitized characters, right? But they didn't have any sort of budget for that fancy setup. They started out with like 80 grand, which sounds like a whole lot, but it's not. I mean, not for the type of stuff they want to do, right? So essentially, they're living together in an apartment in Boston, and they take some money and they buy all these cream colored screens, and they basically nail them all over the walls of the apartment that they're sharing. In fact, in order to film the movies for the game, to film the character moves and things like that, they had to open the door to this apartment and film from the hallway, which led to a very funny story where their neighbors were led to believe that they were filming kinky pornographic movies.
Oh, uh,
Yeah,
wow.
right? Right? They weren't, as we now know. They were making a video game, and they pretty much went broke during it. They exhausted their 80 grand. The one guy who was working on his PhD was still working on his PhD as they're doing this, and he gets a stipend of like 14 grand a year. They exhausted that. They honestly started to resolve themselves to sell off their personal possessions to make ends meet, right? So they're going for broke. They're all in. And with pretty much what's their last 10K, $10,000, they rented a booth at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show to show off their new game, which is now officially called Way of the Warrior. Rubin later said of the Consumer Electronics Show that there were lots of games marketed by publishers as multimedia there, but they felt that they were lots of badly shot interactive video and weird semi gaming crap. And so as a result, he felt that all the publishers that were there to buy new games determined way too late in the process that all this stuff wasn't going to make for good video games and that they needed to be publishing an actual video game. And because of this, essentially Way of the Warriors, which at the time was nearing completion, was one of the best looking options at CES that year. And so it started a bidding war between Universal Interactive, the 3DO company itself, and Crystal Dynamics. Now, in the end, they ended up deciding to go with Universal Interactive, who offered them a place on their lot. Universal Interactive was a subsidiary of Universal Studios, so they had their film lot in Universal City, California. So they basically offered them a building on their lot to make their video game and funding for 3 additional games on top of Way of the Warrior. Also, they vowed that Naughty Dog would retain creative freedom over their projects. So, sounds like a sweet deal, right?
A little bit.
So, in August of 1984, the team, after agreeing to this, pack up their things in Boston and they move out to California. During this trip, they are studying arcade games and they notice that the trend isn't as much fighting games now. I mean, it's continuing to be fighting games, but it's more so that the whole industry is starting to make the transition to full 3D rendering, right? Because the mid 90s is when we got the virtual fighters and the Mario 64s and the stuff like that of the world. And at first, they thought about this concept. They thought about sticking with what they knew and staying in the fighting genre, so to speak. Essentially, what they initially came up with was that they wanted to make a 3D beat 'em up game similar to Final Fight. And what they came up with was an idea called AIOsaurus and Dynastine, or Dynastine, I don't know which, a side scroller basically that is about time traveling scientists who are genetically merged with dinosaurs. But before they got too far with that concept, they realized that their favorite genre in history, the character based action platform genre, pretty much had no games for it in this like in the fully realized 3D concept. So they looked at games that they were fond of, like Donkey Kong Country, for instance, and they wondered how a game like that would function in 3 dimensions. Well, brainstorming this concept, right? They're just kind of looking at game mechanics now. The idea came to them that in a 3D perspective, the player would always be looking at the character's backside instead of their profile. And thus, they named this concept as they started to flesh it out Sonic's Ass Game. Because, yeah, because Sonic the Hedgehog was something they also considered. And if in 3D, you were always going to look at his ass end.
Oh, okay. I mean,
So,
it's not wrong, but it's a hell of a name.
yeah, Sonic's Ass Game. In an old timeline that Naughty Dog published, they said that somewhere around Gary, Indiana, the driving technology behind the Crash Bandicoot series was born. This is where Sonic's ass comes from. By Colorado, A rough game theory for this new game was developed, and they threw their game design for Aosaurus and Dinestein out the window. And by the time they got to California, they had a pretty good idea on what they wanted to do. So they make it to California, they move into their offices on the Universal lot in Universal City, and then they meet with the boss of the publishing studio. He's a man whose name is Mark Cerny, and he's on board with their idea. So the team and Mark Cerny, their boss, so to speak, everyone is sold on the Sonic's Ass game project. And now comes time that they have to decide what they're going to develop on, right? Because they've been doing Apple II until then. They did the 3DO, but are they going to continue with the 3DO? That's one of the options that they look at. They look at the other platforms that are kind of a thing at the time: the Atari Jaguar, the Sega 32X, the Sega Saturn, and they kind of come to the decision that all of these platforms have really clunky development kits and really have sold a poor number of units. On the horizon, however, was the Sony PlayStation. And Sony was, as we found out from various episodes, like the Final Fantasy episode, Sony was pushing really hard for studios to come over and develop for the PlayStation. So the team at Naughty Dog thought about it, and they determined, they considered the clout of Sony, and they kind of looked at the fact too that Sony had no existing mascot character, and they secretly hoped, even in the beginning, that they could change that. So they went to Sony, and the two had a discussion, and it seemed like the relationship was going to work out. Rubin said that they were probably the 44th or 45th company to sign up with Sony. They were about this project was about the 30th game project to start development for the system itself, for the Sony PlayStation. Um, they paid $35,000 for a PlayStation development kit and got to work on what was still called Sonic's Ass game in October of 1994. So right off the bat, the team at Naughty Dog had to decide what type of lead character they were going to develop their game around. And to do so, since we were looking at Sonic's Ass game, they took a page out of Sonic the Hedgehog, and they determined that they wanted to use an existing animal that was pretty obscure. So the team purchased a guidebook on, of all things, Tasmanian mammals. And within the choices of Tasmanian mammals, they narrowed it down to three choices. There was the wombat, the potteroo, and the bandicoot. So as they started the process, they had leaned towards Willie the Wombat as their starting character because it rolled off the tongue well. The reality was they didn't really intend to use it because the name sounded really dorky. Aside from that, when they finally began to look into the name, they found that there was both a non-video game property that already used it, and there was a Japanese exclusive Sega Saturn game called Willy Wombat, so it was pretty much out. But that was the placeholder that they used as they kept going through the game. They brought in a character designer named Charles Zambilias, who had previously worked on cartoons in the 80s, such as She-Ra, Princess of Power, the Ghostbusters animated series, Captain N, the Game Master, and Where's Waldo. And basically, the team at Naughty Dog and the team of the animators, Charles Zambilias, they met weekly, and they gave each other notes, and through trial and error, they kind of worked this whole process out. Starting with Crash Bandicoot, they went with a Bandicoot because they liked what they could get out of design out of it. Colors of Crash Bandicoot were chosen pretty much by eliminating colors that just looked awful on a screen. For instance, red, which bleeds through the older style TVs, so they nixed red, hence orange. Details were added in time, like his gloves and the spots on his back, because they wanted to give players visual cues about the which way Crash was oriented. Originally, they had drawn him with a tail and flappy clothing, but they had to omit that because the PlayStation couldn't display that without flickering. And he also originally had long pants, but they had to shorten it because when he ran around with long pants, the PlayStation flickered. So the whole design process, even in the beginning, is trial and error. The team also decided to make Bandicoot mute because they felt that other mascot voices were lame, were negative, and they distract from the character itself, basically. So they're still making Willy the Wombat, but they've kind of already decided and designed this other Bandicoot creature. They just don't know what to do with it yet. And while they're out one day eating, the villain of the series is conceived, Dr. Neocortex. Andy Gavin has this idea come to him. He envisions an evil genius with a giant head, with an evil genius that's all about his attitude, all about his minions. So he's got this going on. His idea was from the animated television series Pinky and the Brain. He imagined Dr. Cortex as a more malevolent version of Brain with minions that he took from the Weasel characters in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So this concept, along with the Tasmanian theme that they originally looked for the animals, kind of then told the team about where they wanted the game to take place. So they decided on an island theme with some evil lair slash mechanical stuff because it's an evil doctor, right? And that's how they started to work their way through the levels in the game. The first two functional levels that they designed were heavy machinery and the generator room. They both drew from Dr. Cortex's malevolence, and they took inspiration from Donkey Kong Country. They went back to that and they looked at adding some of the things that Donkey Kong Country used to move around. This is where things like the steam vents, the drop platforms, the bouncy pads, the heated pipes, and the enemies that would move back and forth all came from. There are similar elements in Donkey Kong, so they brought them over into this environment. After that, they came up with a jungle environment. The first jungle level they ever created, Jungle Rollers, was created from the pieces of a failed level test that they originally designed. And they arranged the pieces of that level test into a corridor between trees. And so we have a jungle level. I want to emphasize that these levels and the game mechanics that resulted from them were not thought out ahead of time. This team did not put layouts or mechanics down on paper. Like the mascot design process, the levels were created for trial and error, and then they were sketched out to record for other teams in posterity. So it was very much a knee jerk trial and error type of process. And as they made these levels, they essentially came up with the game mechanics that were needed to get through it, right? Um, they Here's some examples. So they made these levels, and then they realized that there was a lot of empty areas in the game because the PlayStation was incapable of generating multiple enemies on the screen. And so they began to create really simple objects to fill in that space. So the Wumpa fruit, the collectible Wumpa fruit, that was the first thing. Really simple texture, something that they could put in there to fill in the space. After that, they decided to come up with a crate. And then there was the crate mechanic where if you jump on it or run through it, it breaks. And then after that, they thought, how cool would it be if we had a crate that exploded? So the TNT crates came from that and the mechanics around the explosions. Again, trial and error. No rhyme, no reason. We think this is cool. We're just going to build it out. If it works, great. We'll put it down on paper. If it doesn't, we'll go back to the drawing board until it works. And then we're going to put it down on paper. By February of 1996, this team had created over 20 levels that were all found with different stages of completion. Now, at this point, the team already knew that they wanted to make a combat, but they still, like I said, kept the name of the character as Willy the Wombat. But it was time for a change. They were gearing up to demonstrate their game at E3 in 1996, and their game and main character needed an actual name. Um, Some things they came up with, again, trial and error process. These include dash, smash, and bash. Right? See the theme?
Yeah,
But
that
in
makes
the
sense.
but in the end, someone came up with Crash Bandicoot, and the team liked it, and it stuck.
Damn, can you imagine if it was like Smash Bandicoot or Dash?
Dash Bandicoot's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, it is kind of cool.
So initially, their bosses at Universal Interactive contested the name. They felt that Crash Bandicoot, along with a female character in the game that was conceived called Tawan, were both overly sexual in nature. Of course, the team at Naughty Dog found this ridiculous, so they threatened to pick up and leave production on the game altogether, rather than give up the name Crash Bandicoot. So the two sides came to a compromise. Crash Bandicoot was in, but Tana, the female character, was out. And then came time for E3, which is an absolutely wild story all in itself. Rob, do you know what else is full of wild stories?
What's that, Dave?
Podcasting. Everybody's doing it these days. Have you, our fellow listener, ever considered making your own podcast? Do you have some wild stories that you'd like to share with the world but don't know how? Our friends at Zencaster have created an all in one podcasting suite of tools that makes it easier than ever to create your own podcast.
With Zencaster, it's super easy to record a podcast. Everyone logs in using their web browser, and you just start recording a high quality podcast right away. It allows you to record up to 4K video with your guests, and with Zencaster's multi layered backups, you always have the highest quality recordings, even if your connection is unstable.
With Zencaster, you never have to worry about what you sound like. Zencaster's post production process makes you sound buttery smooth. It automatically can remove all those ums and ahs and other filler words, gets rid of those awkward pauses in conversation. You can set the right podcast loudness, you can reduce background noise, just make all these menu options, click a button. It processes your audio, it sends you an email with its when it's done so you can go back and download it. Super, super easy.
And the thought of podcasting overwhelms you because you think you need tons of different tools and services? Relax. Those days are over. With Zencaster's all in one podcasting platform, you can do all those cool, fun things Dave was talking about. Create your podcast all in one place and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations.
So if you'd like to start your own podcast, or maybe you want to take your current podcast to the next level, we've got a deal for you. Go to zencaster.com/pricing and use the your and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid platform.
Sign up for Zencaster today, and you can experience the same ease in producing your own high quality podcast as we do each week. Go out and share your ideas with the world.
We are gearing up for E3 1996, and Universal Interactive tells the team at Naughty Dog that they are not allowed to attend E3. Crash Bandicoot, the game is, but the developer of the game, Naughty Dog, is not. The notion is that Universal is attempting to take all the credit for Crash Bandicoot. I might add that as a not that I'm making excuses for them, but I hadn't mentioned. So as a video game publisher, they are brand new. Way of the Warrior was actually only their second game that they ever published as a video game developer studio. The first one being a game called Jurassic Park Interactive for the 3DO. They were created because it was a trend of there was a trend of video game or movie studio manufacturers that were making video games. So Universal Studios Interactive was basically created so that um so that they could take some of their motion picture licenses and turn them into video games. So, not making excuses, but you should know at the time, Universal is brand freaking new, right? So they're trying to steal all the credit for Crash Bandicoot. Aside from telling the team that they're not welcome, the Universal team leaks copies of Crash Bandicoot's temporary box cover, and they leak press materials that omit the Naughty Dog logo. Naughty Dog is nowhere to be found on either one of them. And this actually violates the contract between Universal and Naughty Dog. So, in response, one of the founders of Naughty Dog, Jason Rubin, prints out 1,000 copies of a document that basically introduces Naughty Dog as the creator and developer of Crash Bandicoot. And he goes to E3 and he stands in front of the booth that they were banned from, passing out these flyers.
Nice.
Obviously, in the end, the team settles their differences. It's a funny slash not so funny story at this point. E3 ends up being incredibly successful for the Crash Bandicoot team. In fact, the game was so popular that Sony moved it to the front of their booth, which originally was Twisted Metal was their showcase. And by the end of E3, Crash Bandicoot became their showcase title. We've got a game and a publisher. Now Sony's behind it. We've got all this freaking hype going on, right? And it's time to capitalize off of it. So they get a marketing team and decide that to market the game, they want to establish themselves as a challenger to Nintendo. So they come up with this idea of Crash Bandicoot inspiring a crazed fan to create their own Crash Bandicoot outfit and harass Mario from Nintendo's parking lot. As the marketing team travels to Seattle to film a commercial, along the way they create all these small teasers and put them out there depicting the fans' journey to Nintendo. And then they get to Seattle and they film a commercial near a Nintendo building, but not at the main Nintendo building for a reason. And that is that they felt it aligned with the series' humor, in that the assumption was that this random guy wouldn't have done his homework and he mistakenly went to the wrong building. So they put out this marketing campaign, and with all the hype from E3 behind it, it does very well. So now we've got E3 success, a solid marketing campaign, and all the clout that they need to push through, which they do. They end up finishing this game, and they release it here in the States on September 9th, 1996. Now, with the American release out of the way, it's time to think about going worldwide. And of course, Sony's Japanese, so Japan is the first piece of that puzzle. So the team flies over to Japan, tasked with the presenting Crash Bandicoot to Sony Entertainment Japan. And they bring an artist with them. And this artist basically draws all these renderings of Crash Bandicoot. Of course, they have the game too. And in turn, Sony Entertainment Japan hands them a document that basically they did some market research. It compares Crash with Mario, and it compares Crash with another game that was popular at the time called Nights into Dreams. Crash rates favorably, according to this document, in the graphics department, but Japanese audiences were not thrilled with Crash himself, and they were kind of turned off by his non-Japanese heritage.
But they liked Mario's heritage? Okay.
So they take this feedback and they go back to the artist that they brought with them. Her name was Charlotte Francis, and they turn to her and they say, "Look, can you take this and do something with it and come back in 15 minutes?" So she does. Crash has a huge mouth, and she closed that in a drawing to make him seem less impressive, or aggressive, rather. His eyes, which are green for us, were changed to two small black, like Pac-Man style shapes, and the spikes of his hair were made smaller. So all these changes were made to reflect, the feedback that they had gotten from the Japanese team. The modifications were made, and with this new character design in mind, that they could push and market off of. The Japanese team gave the go ahead for Crash to come over to Japan. So again, got to market it. They get a marketing team, and the Japanese marketing team creates a commercial in which the Crash Bandicoot mascot does a dance, and it ends up being a dance that's so popular that that dance was brought back into the games and incorporated back into the game. So the little dance that Crash does, that's actually from this Japanese marketing campaign.
Oh, nice.
And with that, a few months later, in November of 1996, Crash Bandicoot was released in Japan. It was an absolute success. By the end of 1996, so from September through December, they sold over 1 million units worldwide, which made it the fourth or fifth best selling game of the year, even though it was only sold for 3 months.
Wow.
Right? In 1997, the following year, its success continued, and it remained the 10th best selling game for that entire year. In fact, during 1997, it became the first non Japanese game to receive a gold prize in Japan, which was given to games that sold over 500,000 copies. And thus, with that being said, in September of 1997, it was inducted into Sony's greatest hits line. Its success in Japan was so widespread that in 1997, Naughty Dog got their wish, and Sony Computer Entertainment of America uh, went to Naughty Dog, and they licensed Crash Bandicoot as a mascot for Sony. It would be Sony's third mascot for the Sony PlayStation.
Behind who?
Yeah, I had to look that up too. So the first was a character called Polygon Man, which was a futuristic head made up of polygons. And the second was a character named Sophia from Toshiden. And I don't remember either of those. The first one I remember was Crash.
I was
So,
gonna say Crash is still number one in my book. Wow.
and basically, Crash stayed as Sony Computer Entertainment's mascot from that point until September of 2000. And it was in September of 2000 that Universal made an agreement with Konami to develop future titles in the Crash Bandicoot line that would also break Sony's exclusivity on the franchise. So, in the end, Crash Bandicoot ended up selling 6.8 million copies, making it the 11th best selling Sony PlayStation game of all time. And as we know, Rob, the series didn't end there. There are 8 games in the main series of the franchise, with the latest being released just 4 years ago in October of 2020. It spawned a racing series in Crash Team Racing, and there are 4 games that kind of are racing themed Crash Bandicoot games. There are 3 party themed games for Crash Bandicoot. There are 3 games specifically made for the Game Boy Advance, and 4 more games made specifically for mobile devices like your cell phone. And in all those years, there have also been 15 projects that have been canceled in the Crash Bandicoot series. So there is a lot more that could have been compared to what we have now. There's a Crash manga that was released in 1998. Surprisingly enough, though, aside from some short films created to promote at least one of their games, there haven't been any animated series released. This feels like a series that's really ripe for animation, but they haven't done it. With that being said, in 2021, someone had leaked test footage of a Crash Bandicoot series that was co-produced between Activision, who owns it and now, and Amazon Studios, but that was supposedly canceled due to a script dispute. So yeah, Crash Bandicoot still around, not a mascot any longer, but I think still a relevant character. Maybe not as relevant as it was in the late 90s, but I think it's still a relevant character. So certainly one that is incredibly nostalgic for people that are, that grew up in that time period. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Um as a series, Crash Bandicoot has sold over 40 million units and grossed over $1 billion. So I think it's fair to say that with the last one coming out 4 years ago and that kind of steam behind it, that even though there's not a new game announced in a series, Crash Bandicoot it probably isn't going anywhere at all. Right.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely a fair statement. And
I
apparently the new games are being released to Windows too, which I did not know about. So hey, it means that I get to play my childhood game again. Let's go.
So I played Crash and Spyro like you. These were the games that everyone was playing at the time. They were fun. As a genre, I'm not into that anymore, so it's not really my thing. But back then, like along with the other 3D fully realized games like Mario 64 and everything, like they were on the cutting edge. Like the 3D platforming was cutting edge when it first came out. So we definitely played them and Crash Bandicoot was a lot of fun. I will always have nightmares about the boulder rolling towards you that you have to escape. You know,
Oh my god! Literally, when you were talking about the jungle level, that I mean, granted, it's more than just that, but that first thing that came to mind with that damn jungle level is running from that fucking boulder. I
right,
swear to God, those levels were the bane of my existence.
right, right. So, and that, my friends, is the story of Crash Bandicoot. Wild E3 and trial and error. No rhyme or reason. They just kind of made it up as they went along. It is a story that is in Naughty Dog's history. There are, of course, other games that Naughty Dog has done. We had done an episode on it recently in The Last of Us, which I would encourage you to go check out. And of course, if you want to go check out old episodes, including that episode on The Last of Us, you can do so by going to our website, which is www.memorycardlane.com. And Rob, what else can people find on our website?
You can find a calendar of our upcoming episodes. Find out what topics we're going to be covering in the coming weeks. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come talk and hang out with Dave and I. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us, get access to ad free and unedited versions of our podcast. And you can also find links to our social medias where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is wrong. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a console, a technology. I just find a topic that's relevant to this week, this publication week, and I roll with it. I sit down and I do some research on the topic, and every week my goal is to find new things because I love learning new things about anything, and specifically in this context, all these old video games, these great video games that I grew up playing most of the time, not all of them, but most of the time. I find out all sorts of interesting things about it, and then I, in turn, get to teach you all these interesting things about it. So, in celebration of that cycle of teaching and learning, every week we like to go roundtable and talk about the things that we've learned. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Uh, Dave, I think the craziest thing I learned today is that despite as good of a game as it turned out to be, that so much of the game was just made on a whim, a wing. They winged it. I
They
mean,
winged it. They very much winged it.
that's just mind blowing to me. Like, oh, hey, we have this level. Oh, it's kind of empty. Let's add some stuff, and that became core parts of the game, like the TNT and the crates, like, and the Wumba fruit. Like, just how do you make something so successful and just be like, hey, I don't know what we're doing. Try this. Oh, great, it works. Like, if I tried that, it would just be the biggest pile of crap ever.
True statement.
So that blows my mind. It's fantastic. The creativity of Naughty Dog is obviously top notch, but that's again to me that's just insane. I could not have ever guessed that was the case, and that's kind of amazing.
Well, we know from experience that Naughty Dog is not completely a trial and error company. From The Last of Us, they were anything but when they designed The Last of Us. But of course, by that time they had hired new talent. The Last of Us has a different producer, director, all that fun stuff. So pretty much a different company by that time. But yeah, I mean, at this point for Crash Bandicoot, if you read through, and there's a lengthy articles that you can find about the development process. They just come back to it. Oh, that was trial and error. 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 So they'll flat out say we didn't start out with anything. We made it up as we went along. And then they did a good job at it, no less, you know?
Yeah, that's incredible. So that's my big takeaway. How about yourself?
I enjoyed learning about the E3 debacle. To me, it's funny to think that a publisher thought that they could keep the developer of the game out of the limelight, and then the thought of them being so not even passive aggressive, just so like, okay, fine, I'm gonna stand in front of your booth and pass out flyers, making sure people know. That's just the funniest stuff to me. Like that, it's ridiculous. It's hilarious, is what it is. It's sad that it had to come to that, but it's fantastic. So I think it's great.
Yeah, that is a pretty fantastic thing. Just, it would have been one of those things you wish you could go and actually have seen in person.
So that's my story. Before I take it into next week, Rob, is there anything that you'd like to add to today's episode?
Well, as always, I want to take one quick moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world to us, and we hope you enjoy getting to learn about the development of all these crazy games, consoles, or whatever else we talk about week in, week out. So thank you for joining us.
All right, fellow adventurers, that wraps up our wild ride through the history of Crash Bandicoot. We hope that you enjoyed crashing through this trip down memory card lane, and learning something new about Naughty Dog's kind of rise to fame using this platforming mammal that helped make it happen. Little Tasmanian animal. Next week, though, we're taking a turn into the supernatural as we go back to explore Revelations Persona, the game that introduced Western audiences to the now iconic Persona series. We'll dive into the game's unique blend of RPG mechanics and social simulation as we learn how it was made. We'll take a look at its lasting legacy and basically just kind of look at how it laid the foundation for what is now, honestly, one of the highest rated and more beloved franchises in modern gaming. So if you enjoyed today's adventure, get ready to face your inner demons and join us next week as we explore the world of Persona on yet another trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Do dub 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 do wop ba da ba da bum. Ooga booga.